Hey guys, it's Uncle Ken, and I just wanted to thank you for checking out my first video. A little about me, I've played WoW since way back in the vanilla WoW beta, and basically I'm the stereotypical boomer who's come back for classic WoW. I've gone back to WoW for every expansion on retail, but most of the time I quit in the first few months of playing them. Nothing against retail, but I feel classic and the earlier expansions were much more what I like to play when it comes to WoW. I generally enjoy the challenge and grindy aspects, but I don't know, I appreciate that's not everyone's jam. Now I'm playing through Classic. I actually just tamed Broken Tooth on last weekend, and that's a great thing to complete before layering is completely gone. And I am really enjoying rediscovering the game, which was so very much a big part of my childhood. Before we get into the juicy details about the Shadowlands leak, I wanted to briefly touch on BlizzCon this year and how it's gearing up for some big announcements in the WoW universe. BlizzCon this year is going to be a big one. There have been rumors of such announcements as Diablo 4, which I'm personally super excited for, and Overwatch 2. But also, this could easily be one of the most exciting BlizzCons for WoW, as there are, for the first time in history, two versions of WoW. Retail is slated for a massive, albeit needed expansion to get us out of BFA, and WoW Classic is just trucking along, shrouded in mystery at what the future holds. There's also been a lot of drama with a country that rhymes with angina and a city that rhymes with swan song, so it's going to be entertaining to say the least. So as November 1st fast approaches and we all wait for BlizzCon's numerous big announcements, I started wondering if the leak about World of Warcraft's next expansion called Shadowlands a few months back was actually real. To determine this, I hired the most qualified experts to decide. I'm here with Jojo Matsumoto, a previous lead developer for Blizzard. Jojo, today, if you don't mind, we wanted you to take a look at some of the Shadowlands leak and let us know if it's real. Okay? All right, Mr. Jojo, please make a selection. Is Shadowlands real or is it not real? Deep consideration going on here. Oh my god, it's real! You've heard it here first, from Jojo Matsumoto. Now that we have determined the Shadowlands leak is indisputably real, there's something I want to bring up. Shadowlands is also the name of an expansion from 2003 for a game called Anarchy Online. Not only was the name the exact same as our now confirmed new WoW expansion, but these games shared a lot more than you would think, as they both are MMOs. I started wondering maybe this wasn't just a coincidence in naming, but maybe also in content. I mean, if I literally showed you this concept art and slapped a WoW logo on it and leaked it on Reddit, saying something like, found this in concept artist's trash outside of his house, I would probably farm a lot of Reddit karma and finally ascend in my real life's purpose, to get Reddit points. And then get arrested for stealing people's trash. But cooler heads prevailed and I decided to make this video instead. I realize this is quite a logical leap to even consider that Blizzard would have referenced an older game so heavily for a new expansion, not just to take the name but also to lend gameplay elements from it, but just stay with me here. The Shadowlands expansion was easily one of the largest expansions to hit Anarchy Online, and not only that, it changed the game in so many ways forever. It was extremely well reviewed, and as such, it might not be so far-fetched that Blizzard's retail developers may be looking into the past for inspiration. I would go as far as saying that if Blizzard pulled off an expansion even remotely close to what Anarchy Online did with Shadowlands, I would say retail is definitely back on the menu, boys. What if we superimposed a few of the major changes that were made in Anarchy Online's successful Shadowlands expansion on top of WoW and just took a moment to think about how that would look if used for the upcoming WoW expansion? I'm going to devote the rest of this video to answering and addressing this question specifically. Let's go over the high notes of what the WoW Shadowlands leak said, as this is pretty much the base assumption of this video. The leak consisted of a bunch of text with two leaked screenshots. The main premise of this leak is that Sylvanas was basically never on the Horde's side in Battle for Azeroth and was just trying to cause as much death as possible. This was to send as many souls back to this death realm as possible and essentially create a new army that could fight against some new threat in this strange new realm. This was shown in one of the leaked screenshots, which appears to be from a cutscene. In the screenshot, it looks like all of our souls are tired of being corpse camped by that level 60 rogue, and instead of rezzing and taking that durability hit when we know all our items are yellow, we're just getting on a boat to somewhere new. If we went to an entirely new realm for the next expansion, then this could give Blizzard license to make some massive changes to the game, without making retail players too mad. Plus, we never went through a giant portal to another realm for a successful WoW expansion. Right? It should be noted that this is just the lore of the leak and kind of the general theme of it. I'm avoiding going into too many of the leaked details as subsequent leaks seem to all contradict each other, and I'm going to focus on the main theme here. Before we get into the potential Shadowlands changes for WoW, we should first talk about Anarchy Online and the seemingly not so unrelated history with World of Warcraft. Back in the day when I was a young little noob, now I'm just an old noob, my older brother brought home a game called Anarchy Online. It was the first time I'd ever really interacted with an MMO, and I eventually got pretty hooked on it. It was a sci-fi based MMO published and developed by a Norwegian video game development company named Funcom. This game was ridiculously hard, and this was from the old guard of MMOs where grinding and a lot of these hard quality of life features were just accepted ways of life. The initial launch of the game was historic in every single bad way possible. To the point, it continues to make top 10 lists of worst game launches of all time. One thing I'll add is my brother even told me he remembers back in the day when we got it in the beginning, starting the game up and the entire game was in German, as if the English locale file was just mysteriously removed from their servers or something. After we collectively learned a bit more German, Funcom fixed their shit and it was overall a fun game. World of Warcraft was released back in November 2004. That means Anarchy Online was out for a solid 3 years beforehand, during which time I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination to think that a few Blizzard WoW developers tried another game that was in the genre of the game they were making. As I said before, Blizzard and Anarchy Online seem to have shared some gameplay features in the past. This isn't really surprising, as Blizzard essentially was, and still is, the Apple of the MMO genre. They repackaged what was already out there from these older, more hardcore MMOs, picking and choosing specific elements of gameplay to create a much broader appeal to the masses. Of course, they innovated a lot of things as well, but it's safe to say everything is a remix, and those old MMOs built on older ideas before them also. Companies still even try to repeat what Blizzard did, but so far no one seems up to the task. So what are some examples of similar features between World of Warcraft and Anarchy Online? I picked a few of my favorites and want to talk about the following. Factions, the Druid and Adventurer classes in World of Warcraft and Anarchy Online, ground and flying mounts, and heirlooms. So first, let's start with the factions. In Anarchy Online, there were two main factions and a third faction called Neutral, which was like the friend who could never make up their mind on what they want in the McDonald's drive-thru. Answer, it's nuggets. It's always freaking nuggets, man. The two major factions were called Omnitech and the Clan. I know, it's just, hold up. I know what you're thinking. It's not that kind of clan. Just kind of unfortunate naming. Basically, Omnitech was like a hypercorporation that was mining the resources from this planet, and the miners that were doing it rebelled and then formed this union and the clan and fought back. Whatever, that's enough sci-fi for today. Essentially, though, this mirrored the Horde and the Alliance from a WoW gameplay standpoint, and to this day, it still feels similar for me. Cities were segregated by factions, and PvP was always focused against the other faction. There wasn't battlegrounds for a long time, so it was almost entirely all world PvP, as well as world PvP objectives that they added with the Nodum Wars patch. Another similarity is the Druid class in World of Warcraft and the Adventurer class in Anarchy Online. From the Anarchy Online fandom profession page, an adventurer's soul is at home in the wild. Adventurers study the animals, learn their ways, and gain some of their abilities along the way. Their weapon skills are well balanced with equal advancement opportunities in melee and ranged combat. An adventurer is an excellent healer, only truly rivaled by the doctor. Note, the Doctor class was essentially the priest class in WoW. So in Anarchy Online, as an adventurer, you could transform into random-ass animals, like this cute little guy, which was kind of the unofficial mascot of the game called Elite, which was kind of a play on words of 1337. Yeah, real boomer shit. Anyways, these animal forms would increase your movement speed just like they do in WoW as a druid. As the description also said, they were quite effective healers, just like druids are in WoW. They even allowed you to transform into a parrot and gain flying, which was kind of added to WoW much later for druids. Speaking of flying, let's chat about mounts. Another thing that both games shared and implemented very similarly was mounts. Both games featured ground and flying mounts, where they each had their normal and epic variations that were even faster. Oddly enough, the way you could get the mounts was also very similar. You could buy them from a vendor or hope to get a world drop of them doing an instance run. Exactly the same as WoW. The ground mounts in Anarchy Online looked like you were driving inside of a shoe, and the flying mounts looked like you stole the Silver Surfer's board and turned it into a spaceship. One thing I would like to focus on between the two games that's similar here is that when you're flying in WoW, you can just kind of hover. What I mean by hover is that your flying mount is able to traverse the skies but can also just stop and sit there indefinitely. Flying in Anarchy Online works and felt the exact same way as it does in WoW. Finally, let's talk about twinks. If you think the release of Battlegrounds and Classic WoW is going to have a lot of twink players, you should have seen Anarchy Online back in the day. Anarchy Online essentially had the exact same heirloom system as Retail WoW does, except Retail WoW implemented it much, much later. Essentially what heirlooms are for the uninitiated is an item that kind of levels up with your character as you level, up to some predefined cap, normally maintaining the best in slot as for that gear as you level. Not only did leveling items like heirlooms exist, but you could also enable low-level characters to fly quite early on. The main barrier to overcome was essentially just having enough money to buy the spaceship. This really pissed off some users, as this user outlines, as it was pretty infuriating for players still grinding to get their flying mount. But sadly, this MMO was not about fairness, and likely as that much higher player stood there cursing the skies, the low-level twink just flew away and simply replied, "Get good." At this point, I could go on and on about the similarities between the games. I could actually make an entire video series about that, but I hope you guys get the point. So, now that we've gone over some examples of similarities between the games, let's talk what could happen with Shadowlands. In September 2003, Funcom released their first major expansion, Shadowlands. It was so huge, news outlets said it was bigger than most games were at the time. So what did they add? 7 new endgame zones, which were accessed through a portal. Sound familiar? 2 new classes based in the New Realms lore with their own new starting areas. 2 new factions and a 3rd minor faction based in the Shadowlands. Shadow breeds and perks, which was essentially a form of new character progression at the endgame. Basically nothing new for veteran WoW retail players, just think about artifact weapons or the Heart of Azeroth. You were not allowed to fly in the Shadowlands, and in fact this was never changed. And last but not least, the only time in Anarchy Online's history where they increased the base level cap from 200 to 220. Subsequent expansions added different forms of experience, but no expansion ever adjusted the level cap again. This was kind of ironic since Shadowlands for WoW might be the only expansion where the level cap is reduced. Of these changes, I wanted to focus on specifically 2 with how they could work if they were added in similar fashion to WoW in the next expansion. Namely, how these new factions were implemented, and the 7 new zones and how they were accessed. Spoiler, it was much different than we have ever experienced in WoW. Let's start with factions. So Shadowlands introduced 3 new factions. 3 new factions. Sounds familiar, Mr. Leaker. If we look at how the factions worked in Anarchy Online Shadowlands and map this onto WoW, what could that look like? In Shadowlands, there were the redeemed, good guys faction, the unredeemed, bad guys faction, and the guardians, the neutral chill guys. In Shadowlands, every mob you killed had an effect on the reputation of one of those 2 main factions, redeemed and unredeemed, making it important to know what quests you were doing and what things you were killing, as you would automatically become affiliated with the opposite faction in the process. As an aside, recently as I was playing through Deathless in Classic WoW, I found an Alliance-only questline which is exactly a direct copy of this implementation. The questlines were called Strange Alliance Brutal Politics. Might ring a bell for a few of you. For Strange Alliance, you had to gain a friendly reputation with the Gelkis clan, and for Brutal Politics, you had to gain a friendly reputation with the Megrim clan. I didn't finish either quests, but whatever. To gain rep with the Megrim clan, you had to kill the Gelkis clan, and vice versa. Initially, each faction doesn't attack you right away, they're kind of just neutral. But slowly, as you kill more, they become aggressive towards you. Thus, it presents a player with a choice behind their actions with which faction they want to align with. Anyways, back to the Shadowlands. When you started in the Shadowlands, you started out as neutral with the two main factions inside of Shadowlands. This worked just like the questline I just described. As you chose which factions and cities to quest and grind in, slowly you became attributed with one side, causing for the other side to attack you on sight and prevent you from entering their city anymore. Sadly, this was never fully implemented as the clan and Omnitech had their own default leanings towards one of these Shadowlands factions, making it near impossible to attribute with the side that I guess the developers didn't want you to be attributed with. Either way, it still stands as a very interesting way to deal with factions in a new content release such as an expansion. So what about that third faction, the Guardians? The Guardians required a minimum amount of faction with them in order to progress to the next zone. This became a faction that despite what side you were on, redeemed or unredeemed, you all needed to grind this faction. You got reputation from quests, but also from these super strong monsters lurking on the fringes of each zone. I liked that. Having monsters like this that are mini-bosses around the fringes of the zone makes it truly feel like it's being constantly invaded by some outside force. From the Anarchy Online Universe guide on factions in the Shadowlands, the Guardians are followers of Ergo, and their purpose is to hold back the creatures of chaos that have invaded the brink areas of the Shadowlands, which consist primarily of hecklers and horrors. So how would this look if implemented in WoW? If this choose-your-own-adventure faction system was implemented in WoW, I think this could be a really cool change and very different from historical WoW expansions. It would also break the faction line in Azeroth for the first time. By giving players an important choice of who they align with, which has recently been used in the BFA expansion kind of, with aligning with the Horde Rebels or with Sylvanas for the Horde, it helps increase immersion through the sense that your choices kind of matter in the end. It could also open up the world in the sense of having Alliance and Horde on the same team and allow for a completely new cross-faction PvP system or PvE system. Could all make sense from a lore perspective. But the chances that Blizzard will take such a huge risk is honestly pretty unlikely. And regarding the reputation locked zones, this would probably not be very well received unless implemented tremendously well and within the story to help increase immersion, just like the Shadowlands did with the Guardians protecting the fringes of the zone. In general, I think WoW players are quite sensitive to reputation grinding mechanics, as this gameplay feature was quite overused in the past. Now, let's talk about them 7 new zones. Yeah, 7. In recent expansions, Blizzard has spent a lot of time making them look very unique, beautiful, and high quality. But I feel having fewer, highly crafted zones makes the expansion feel less big and immersive than, say, 7 new zones, but with reused assets and maybe not so much high-quality art for each zone. But wait a second, Blizzard used to do this. Just look to the Burning Crusade, and lo and behold, the magic number of 7 new zones were added. It was also one of the most liked expansions of all time for WoW. And we went through a portal. Finally, there was something special about how players traverse these zones. Not only was there a minimum faction to even set foot in the zones, adding to the intrigue and a feeling of real progression when you got there, but the last 2 zones, Inferno and Pandemonium, actually had a form of attunement. Yeah, you heard me right, attunement for a zone. So far, Blizzard has used attunement many ways in the past as a way to prepare for endgame raiding content. Just think back to Classic and how long the Onyxia quest chain was. For these attunements in Anarchy Online, you typically had to complete a long quest chain also, gathering items to build one specific item which you absolutely needed to be able to survive the next zone. Of these zones that required attunement, my favorite was Inferno. If you entered the zone without the attunement item, you would get hit with a massive 2000 DPS dot from the Inferno environment that would basically kill you quickly. To combat this, you had to build the Inferno boots to even be able to exist in this zone. But what I really loved about this was they didn't just lock the zone behind a few reputation limits. No, once you got the required reputation, you were allowed to enter. And when you stepped foot without making the careful preparations, you burned alive. The zone is named Inferno at the end of the day, so I mean, come on, what do you expect? It's these kinds of strange features which end up living in gamers' memories for a long time. I would love to pretend and think Blizzard would implement this kind of stuff in retail WoW, but I think this is really not just what that audience would want. Instead, I think these kinds of features could be very interesting in Classic Plus if it happens. In summary, I think it would be really cool if Blizzard took some big risks and implemented some of these features, such as zone attunement or even rep-locked zones. I also think Blizzard should focus on making more content, i.e. zones, and lowering their quality standards a bit to make that happen. BlizzCon is 2 weeks away, and I can't wait to see what information gets revealed. If Shadowlands ends up being real, just remember you heard it here first. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please leave a like to boost my fragile sense of worth. If you didn't like it, scream into a paper bag. And if you would like to see more videos, please hit the subscribe button, as I will be publishing more in the coming weeks. And remember, keep your feet on the ground.